I moved into what I thought was just another quiet suburban neighborhood until I met Karen. She's the kind of woman who thinks she runs the entire block, complete with her fake HOA rules and wannabe cops patrolling like they own the place. Too bad she had no idea who she was messing with. I'm an FBI agent who doesn't take threats lightly. But what happened next? Let's just say things got a lot more intense than she bargained for. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from today. I woke up to a fierce pounding on my door, so loud that my windows seemed to rattle. Still half asleep, I hurried to the front hall, thinking someone might be in trouble. Through the peephole, I saw two people wearing matching uniforms with bright letters that read, HOA Police. Their badges looked cheap, like something from a party store, but they stood tall and glared at me with stern faces. My heart thumped faster than it should at dawn. I opened the door a crack and said, "Can I help you?" The taller officer, a man with a sharp jaw, pointed at me. "We're here on official business," he declared. "Your property has multiple violations, and we need to inspect your garage." I felt a surge of frustration. "What are you talking about? There's nothing in my garage that breaks any rules." The shorter officer, a woman with narrow eyes, shot back, "Don't make this harder. We have authority from the HOA." I noticed they did not mention warrants or real police involvement. In a calm voice I said, "I'm an FBI agent. If you have real cause, show me proper papers." That made the tall one smirk. Being FBI doesn't excuse you from neighborhood codes. Just then I saw movement behind them. Karen, my neighbor, peered over their shoulders with a smug grin. She had always been loud and pushy, complaining about every small thing on our block. I knew right away she must have staged this little show, and my gut twisted with worry. Stepping onto my porch, I kept my voice steady. "Karen, what's going on here?" She lifted her chin. "Oh, I'm just making sure the rules are followed," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "You can't claim special treatment because of your job." The fake officers nodded. "We have reports of strange activity in your garage," said the woman officer. I let out a tense laugh. "Strange activity? Like what?" Karen shrugged. "I heard noises late at night. Could be anything. You might be storing hazardous materials. Or maybe you're plotting something." My jaw tightened. "That's nonsense, and you know it. If there's a real problem, I'll cooperate. But this is harassment." The tall officer pulled out a piece of paper that looked like a typed form. There was no seal, no signature, just words that said I was under investigation by the HOA police. I tried to stay calm. "That's not an official document. You two have no right to barge in." Karen let out a dramatic sigh. "You sure you want to argue? I can add your refusal to the list of violations." I glared at her. "Since when does the HOA send out its own police force? I've lived here long enough to know we only have volunteers who check on yards and paint colors." The shorter officer flashed a plastic-looking badge in my face. "We have new powers now. Step aside." I shook my head. "Number. Unless you come back with real law enforcement and a valid warrant, you're not entering my home." The man took a step forward. "Don't test us." I felt my anger spike, but I forced it down. As an FBI agent, I knew better than to start a physical argument on my porch. Instead, I crossed my arms. "If you try to come in here, you'll be the ones facing charges." Karen smirked again. "You can't threaten us. Everybody on the street knows you think you're above the rules." Suddenly my phone buzzed in my pocket. Glancing at the screen, I saw my boss's name flashing. My stomach tightened. I had never gotten a call from him so early. "One moment," I told the fake officers, stepping back into my entryway. The tall man shouted after me, "We're not done here." Ignoring him, I answered the call. My boss's voice sounded strained. "Get to the office right now. We have a problem." My heart sank. "Is this about some complaint against me?" There was a pause, then he said, "I'll explain in person." I hung up and walked back to the door. The two fake cops were still there, with Karen towering behind them like she owned the place. "I have to go," I said. "I'll deal with this later." The woman officer shook her head. "If you leave, we'll mark you as uncooperative." Karen stepped closer, her gaze cold. "You want your neighbors to see you run away?" I sighed. "Karen, this is ridiculous. You know you can't arrest me." She tilted her head. "I'm not arresting you. They are, and I'm not stopping them." The male officer raised a pair of plastic zip ties, as if he planned to cuff me. I had to remind myself to keep my cool. "Put those down," I said. "Impersonating a law officer is a crime. You know that, right?" The woman officer grabbed her radio, but I doubted it actually connected to any real dispatch. Karen clucked her tongue. "You might want to listen. They have the power to write you up." My jaw clenched. "A fake citation means nothing." The tall man waved the zip ties in my face. "You want to find out if these are fake too?" At that moment, I realized how far this had gone. They wanted to push me into doing something rash. It was a setup, plain and simple. I forced myself to stand down, taking a slow breath. "Look," I said, "I'm stepping away to handle an urgent matter at my real job. You all need to leave my property." Karen shrugged. "We'll be watching. The HOA has eyes." That made me bark out a laugh. "The real HOA might, but you sure aren't it?" The male officer pressed his lips into a thin line. "We'll give you one last warning." Then he glanced at Karen, who nodded. If you don't cooperate, we'll recommend disciplinary action. I glared at them. Recommend it to whoever you want. Now get off my porch. They backed away, but not before the woman snapped a photo of me with her phone. Karen gave me a mocking smile. Smile for the records. My stomach churned. I waited for them to step off my lawn, then slammed the door. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my boss. Hurry! My whole body felt tight, like a spring about to snap. This was exactly what I didn't need, especially if something serious was happening at the bureau. Yet these phony officers had thrown my morning into chaos, and Karen's grin still lingered in my mind. It took me 10 minutes to calm down before I finally grabbed my keys and headed out. The fake cruiser was parked at the end of the street, its lights off. I noticed Karen's car was gone, which meant she might be prowling around elsewhere, possibly telling neighbors a twisted version of the story. I drove away trying to steady my breathing. My boss's tone on the phone had sounded dire, and that rattled me even more than Karen's antics. As I pulled onto the main road, I caught myself checking the mirror again and again, half expecting that HOA police car to follow me. But there was no sign of them. Still, I felt trapped between two nightmares. The phony cops who wanted to corner me at home, and something big looming at work. I reached the FBI field office and headed inside. My boss stood in the hallway, looking stiff and anxious. You took your sweet time, he snapped, then waved me into his office. I shut the door behind us, my heart in my throat. He demanded to know why local authorities were complaining about my threatening behavior. I explained the situation, emphasizing how those officers had no real badges and that Karen was behind it. He stared at me for a long moment. Well, we have a problem, he said. Higher-ups have flagged this. There's talk of misconduct, and I can't protect you if it escalates. My stomach dropped. But I'm innocent, I insisted. Someone's framing me, or at least trying to push me out. He rubbed his eyes. I don't care if they're real cops or not. There's paperwork claiming you resisted a lawful inspection. It's all nonsense, but it's on my desk now. I felt a flush of anger rising up my neck. Karen must have sent it. She's got some crazy plan. He let out a slow sigh. Like I said, I can't do much if official complaints keep coming. Keep your cool. Prove they're fake. Otherwise, you'll be dealing with an internal review. Panic flared, but I nodded, knowing there was no quick fix. As I left his office, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from a blocked number. Better watch your step. We know who you are. I nearly crushed my phone in my hand. These people were trying to destroy my life, and now they had found a way to make it look official. I trudged through the day, haunted by the morning's clash and the sinking feeling that Karen had taken her petty rules to a sick new level. Even some of my coworkers shot me strange looks, like they'd already heard rumors. Before I left for home, I stopped by the break room, where an agent named Davis pulled me aside. Got a second? He asked quietly. Sure, I said. He glanced around, checking if anyone was listening. I overheard something in passing. Word is you're on thin ice. You might want to watch your back. My chest tightened. You mean watch my back here or in my neighborhood? Davis frowned. Both, maybe. And I'd keep an eye on that Karen lady. She's bragging about getting you in trouble. By the time I left the building, the sun was sinking low in the sky. I drove home with my nerves on edge, wondering if those fake officers would be on my street again. When I turned onto my block, sure enough, I saw a strange SUV parked near my house. Its tinted windows made me shiver. I parked, got out, and eyed the SUV, but the engine was off, and nobody stepped out. Keeping my breathing steady, I hurried inside, locked the door, and drew the curtains. Almost right away, my phone dinged with an email notification. It was from the Bureau's Internal Affairs team, asking me to explain my morning altercation with the local security detail. I dropped onto my sofa in a daze. Karen had found a way to link her phony patrol with real authorities, and now my job was on the line. Even though the so-called HOA officers had left my house earlier, they still lurked in my neighborhood, and the Bureau was pressing me for answers. With Karen stirring up trouble at every turn, I sensed that the storm around me was only getting stronger, and I had no clue how far her scheme would reach. I got home later that day and saw the same fake HOA police cruiser idling at the end of my street. My pulse sped up as I parked, but I forced myself to act normal. Once inside, I peeked through the blinds. The car stayed put, like it was daring me to confront it again. I checked my messages, hoping for a response from the real HOA or some sign that Karen's hoax was collapsing. Instead, I found nothing but a bounced email and a threatening voicemail. The muffled voice warned, "We know you're digging. Back off, or this gets worse." That single line told me Karen wasn't alone in this plan. The next day, I tried calling the official HOA number listed on an old newsletter, but my call went straight to a recorded message about technical difficulties. Frustrated, I fired off an email titled, "Urgent, Possible Impersonation," only to have it bounce back as undeliverable. I even checked the neighborhood website. It showed out-of-date information and no mention of any new security measures. It felt like Karen had shut down every communication channel, leaving me with no official recourse. I decided to reach out to a local police contact named Alvarez, a no-nonsense officer who sometimes traded intel with the Bureau. Over the phone, I summarized the situation: fake badges, bogus citations, and a neighbor leading the charge. Alvarez sounded skeptical, but promised to investigate the license plate of the so-called HOA vehicle. If it belongs to a private security firm, he said, they can't legally act as law enforcement. As I waited for Alvarez's callback, the tension in my own block kept rising. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to before now whispered behind their fences, eyeing me like I was the villain. One morning, Tamara, one of the few people who still talked to me, knocked on my door, looking pale and frantic. "They left this on my porch," she said, holding up a notice demanding a fine for unapproved paint colors. I skimmed the text and recognized the same phony language they'd aimed at me, warning about forced eviction if she didn't pay. She looked ready to cry. I called the HOA for help, but the line was dead. Is Karen even allowed to do this? My anger flared. "No, this is a scam," I said, wishing I had a solution. "Don't pay them. I'll figure this out." But she only shrugged, fear in her eyes. I can't risk losing my home. If nobody's stopping them, then maybe it's real. Meanwhile, work at the FBI became a minefield. My boss called me in for an update, his voice tight with frustration. "I'm getting more reports of your conflicts with local authorities," he said, tapping a folder on his desk. "Care to explain?" I did my best to detail Karen's phony cops and show him the worthless citations they had slapped me with, but he frowned and shrugged. "If they claim to be private security, I can't make all this vanish. Higher-ups are asking questions, and they're not pleased." That left me feeling cornered. Even if the so-called HOA police were fakes, the noise they made was echoing at the Bureau. I couldn't afford more trouble. Every day I worried about an email or phone call telling me I was officially under investigation. One evening, I spotted Karen standing in her driveway, arms folded as she watched me pull in. I stepped out of my car and marched straight up to her, ignoring the nervous flutter in my stomach. "We need to talk," I said. She just raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." I kept my tone cool. "You've set these fake officers on me, and now you're targeting innocent neighbors. Why?" She flashed a thin smile. "It's not personal. People around here forget that we have standards. I'm just making sure we enforce them." I clenched my fists at my sides. "By scaring everyone? That's not how this works." She shrugged. "They don't seem scared to me. They pay the fines, they follow rules, and life goes on." My anger simmered. "What's your endgame?" She tilted her head, as though confused by my question. "Endgame? I'm just cleaning up the neighborhood. You're the one refusing to cooperate." Before I could respond, one of the faux cops strode over, giving me a stern look. "Move along," he ordered. "We have business with Miss Karen." My jaw tightened. "You have no legal authority here." He lifted a flimsy badge and smirked. "We're all the authority we need." Rather than argue, I stepped back, not wanting to give them another excuse to file a complaint. Karen shot me a final, smug glance before they walked off together, leaving me fuming in the street. That night, I tried to calm down by reviewing old HOA documents from my filing cabinet. I found a reference to a once-proposed security program that never got approved. Karen's name was listed as a main advocate. The plan had been tabled when residents decided they didn't want a military-style presence in the neighborhood. Now, it seemed she'd created her own version, using any means necessary. A deep chill ran down my spine. If she could hijack an entire community, maybe she had friends in high places too. Friends who could make real trouble for me at the FBI. A few days later, Alvarez finally called back. "That plate belongs to a private security outfit, but I can't find any license contract with your HOA," he said, sounding more certain now. "They're acting without approval." I let out a breath I'd been holding. "This is proof they're not real cops," I said, relief mixing with anger. "But how do I tie it to Karen?" He hesitated. "I can't dig deeper unless there's an official complaint on file, and so far, there isn't." My frustration boiled over. "This is an official complaint. I'm telling you, they threatened me on my property." Alvarez sighed. "I believe you, but I need statements from other neighbors who will back you up. Otherwise, it's your word against theirs." I realized then how carefully Karen had cultivated fear. No one wanted to stand against her, especially if they risked facing these pseudo-cops. That meant I was on my own, unless I could build a solid case. Meanwhile, the Bureau grew more impatient. A supervisor from Internal Affairs summoned me to a brief meeting. She asked pointed questions about my aggressive behavior with local authorities, referencing a typed report full of half-truths. I stated my side of the story, but she simply tapped her pen on the folder and said, "We're reviewing all angles." My chest felt tight as I left her office. Even if I was telling the truth, the repeated complaints made me look like a liability. Karen was winning this round, using her phony goons and fake citations to undermine my credibility. My only solace was that Tamara still believed me, though she was too afraid to speak up in a formal way. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I found an envelope taped to my front door. It bore a counterfeit HOA seal, and inside was a notice claiming I'd violated Community Ordinance 301. The penalty? A hefty fine. Or further corrective measures. My patience snapped. I slammed the envelope on my kitchen table and called Karen's number, leaving a furious voicemail demanding she stop her harassment. An hour later, my phone buzzed. The number was blocked. "Don't threaten Karen again," a voice hissed. "We know your boss, and we can make your life difficult." The line went dead before I could speak. Rage coiled in my gut as I realized these people were well connected, or at least wanted me to believe they were. Late that night, I peered out my window at the quiet street. Porch lights glimmered, and a breeze rustled across neatly trimmed lawns. If anyone glanced over, they'd see a picture-perfect suburb, but I felt trapped in a twisted game, with Karen pulling the strings. I was no closer to proving her scam, and the clock was ticking on my FBI career. My phone chimed with an email from a colleague. "Heads up, internal review might launch soon. Rumors are swirling." Great. Another storm on the horizon, and I was still stuck battling a neighbor who'd found a frightening way to seize power. As I shut off my lights, I couldn't help but wonder what Karen's next move would be, and whether I'd stand any chance once she made it. Even though I'd discovered the private security link, I still had no solid proof tying Karen to the scheme, or clearing my name at the FBI. My only lead was the plate number Alvarez traced. But without neighbors brave enough to step forward, I stood on shaky ground, and Karen was ready to push me over the edge. Tension clung to my every move, and the stress of being under scrutiny at the FBI only intensified my fear of Karen's next strike. Whenever I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. Sometimes from neighbors who turned suspicious, sometimes from that unmarked car lurking at the corner. Late one afternoon, I headed out to buy groceries, hoping a quick errand would clear my head. As I pulled out of my driveway, I noticed a figure behind Karen's hedge, possibly keeping watch. The realization that my own neighborhood had become enemy territory made my stomach knot. Halfway to the store, my phone buzzed with an unknown caller. I hesitated, then answered. A gravelly voice said, "Stop digging, or else." Before I could respond, the line went dead, leaving me with an uneasy chill in my chest. After the grocery run, I got home to find a crumpled flyer jammed under my wiper. It read, "HOA police, volunteers needed," listing a meeting date and Karen's address. So, she was recruiting more help now, luring neighbors into her web of phony authority. The bottom of the page mentioned a membership fee to cover uniform costs. I shuddered at how blatant it was. If even a handful of people fell for her pitch, she'd have an entire squad of bully enforcers roaming the block. I snapped a photo of the flyer for evidence, then tore it up, not wanting it to float around my yard. As I walked up my steps, I noticed the blinds in Karen's window move slightly. She was probably watching me, but I didn't care. I shut my front door and bolted it tight. Inside, I spread my scattered notes on the dining table, trying to build a timeline of her takeover. There were dozens of warnings, fines, and bogus citations. Some were directed at me. Others Tamara had shared. A pattern emerged. Each piece looked like a stepping stone, systematically chipping away at normal HOA processes until Karen could claim everything ran through her. She'd created a vacuum of confusion, then filled it with her own made-up structure. The question was why, or more importantly, who else stood behind her? The voice on the phone that kept warning me didn't sound like any neighbor I recognized. It had a menace that suggested real muscle, and that meant someone with resources had her back. That evening, I invited Tamara over so we could piece together what we knew. She arrived with a thick envelope of her own documents. "I found old newsletters that mentioned Karen taking over the events committee," she said, sitting down at my table. "At the time, we thought she just wanted to manage block parties and yard sales. Now, I see she had bigger goals." I flipped through some of the pages, shaking my head in disbelief. "It's like she's been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment." Tamara's hands trembled as she pointed out a line from a 6-month-old letter. "Local security guidelines will be enforced for the safety of all residents." It bore Karen's signature, along with a vague reference to third-party officials. Tamara placed her hand over mine. "Do you think any part of this is legal?" she asked, voice tight with worry. I shook my head. Number. But nobody's stopping her. We shared a grim look. Even the real HOA board was out of the picture, either silent or forced into hiding. And the police wouldn't act without clear evidence of criminal wrongdoing. As for the bureau, I was stuck behind layers of internal reviews. The next day I decided to visit Alvarez in person. Maybe if I showed him the collected documents, he'd see the scope of Karen's plot. I drove to the station, the flyer and citations stacked in a manila folder on my passenger seat. My heart rattled in my chest, worried that someone might follow me. At a stoplight, I spotted a black sedan with tinted windows behind me. It lingered too long when the light turned green, raising my suspicions. Once I reached the station and parked, the sedan slowed, then turned down a side street. My pulse pounded, convinced I'd just been tailed. Inside, Alvarez ushered me into a cramped office. "Sorry for the mess," he said. "We're short on space right now." I placed the folder on his desk and explained everything. The calls, the flyers, the brand new push for more fake officers, the rumor that they were collecting money. He glanced through the pages, whistling under his breath. "This is bigger than I thought. But how do we pin it on Karen?" I leaned in. We have her name on multiple documents, plus neighbors who can testify. If you need statements, I can gather them. Alvarez frowned. We'd need them in writing, and these folks can't be too scared to sign their names. Otherwise, it's just hearsay. A heavy sigh left me. My neighbors were terrified of crossing Karen, and I couldn't blame them. For all I knew, she had real power somewhere, or at least powerful friends. I asked Alvarez about the tinted SUV plates again, hoping there was more to learn. He scanned his computer. It's registered to a private security firm with ties to an out-of-state corporation. Could be some shell company, hard to trace. My shoulders sagged. So basically, a dead end? He nodded, grim-faced. I can keep digging, but unless they break the law in a way we can prove, we're stuck. I swallowed my frustration and thanked him, though it felt like I was no closer to stopping Karen. On my way out, my phone buzzed, a text from my boss. We need to talk ASAP, be here first thing tomorrow. My mind spun with worst-case scenarios. Maybe the phony HOA squad had filed another complaint against me, or Karen had found a new way to sabotage my record. That night, I barely slept. My thoughts whirled with a sense of impending doom, sure that Karen would strike again in some unexpected way. Around 2 in the morning, I jolted upright to the sound of a car door slamming outside. I crept to the window and peeked out. A figure stood by the curb, looking at my house. For a heartbeat, I worried it was Karen, but the silhouette seemed different, taller and bulkier. After a moment, they climbed back into a vehicle and drove off, leaving me rattled and wide awake. The next morning, I dragged myself to the bureau, bracing for whatever my boss had to say. He was waiting by his office door, arms folded. "This is bad," he muttered, ushering me inside. I sat down, my gut tight. "I've got a dozen complaint forms in front of me," he said, dropping a file onto his desk. "All from your neighborhood, all accusing you of misconduct, threats, even property damage." My mouth went dry. "Property damage? That's absurd." He rubbed his temples. "I know, but it's in black and white, official statements, with addresses and signatures." My head spun. Karen had clearly pressured neighbors into signing whatever she wanted them to sign. Now it looked like my entire community was turning against me. The boss shook his head. "I believe you when you say this is a setup, but the higher-ups see a pattern. This is going to escalate unless we figure out the truth, and soon." I tried to keep a handle on my anger. "Give me a chance to prove these people are impersonators. They're not recognized by any real authority." He nodded slowly. "All right, but we can't shield you forever. Internal affairs is breathing down my neck." A grim silence settled between us. I thanked him for his patience, knowing time was running out. As I left the office, I fought a surge of desperation. Karen was strangling my career with her cunning moves. At this rate, I'd be fired or put on indefinite leave before I could expose her. I thought about how easily she'd convinced neighbors to file false statements. Fear, bribes, intimidation. Whatever methods she used, they worked, and I was the lone target. By the time I drove home, late in the day, I felt emotionally wrung out. The fake cruiser was back on my street, parked right outside my house with its lights off. I exited my car and approached it, determined to confront them once and for all. A figure rolled down the window just an inch, and a harsh voice snarled, "Back off, or you'll regret it." My heart hammered. The threat was clear, but so was my resolve. Karen's twisted empire of fear had to be dismantled, and I couldn't let her win. My job teetered on the edge, and my neighborhood had turned hostile, but I still needed proof that Karen was the puppet master behind these bogus enforcers. The stakes couldn't be higher, and I knew I was heading straight into a confrontation that might cost me everything. I drove to the FBI headquarters with my pulse hammering, bracing for the worst. My boss had told me about an official inquiry into my so-called misconduct, and I was already running on fumes. Weeks of harassment, false reports, and tension with Karen's phony patrol had left me exhausted and jittery. As I walked into the large, echoing lobby, I noticed people giving me wary looks. News of my troubles had spread, and it felt like I was wearing a giant target. A tight knot formed in my chest. I tried to steady my breathing and remind myself that the truth was on my side. When I reached the conference room, an agent I barely knew opened the door and led me inside. At the long table sat a panel of higher-ups, each wearing a stern expression. My boss stood near the back, arms folded, looking grim. An older agent cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss the numerous complaints against you. They involve alleged threats to neighborhood authorities and repeated refusals to obey local laws." My heart pounded. "Those authorities are fakes," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm. "Their badges aren't real, and the HOA never approved them." One of the panelists, a steely-eyed woman, lifted a thick file. "We have statements from at least 10 neighbors claiming otherwise. They say you bullied them." My blood boiled. "I have documents proving this is a setup. The so-called HOA police belong to a private security firm with no legal standing." The panel exchanged glances, but their expressions stayed guarded. Suddenly, the door swung open, and in walked Karen. She wore a suit, not her usual casual clothes, and carried a sleek briefcase. My mouth fell open in shock. "What is she doing here?" I blurted, my voice raw with disbelief. One of the agents cleared his throat. Ms. Garrett has submitted evidence on behalf of the local enforcement group. My mind spun. So Karen was invited to testify against me in an official FBI inquiry. She stepped forward, calm and collected. "Good morning," she said, sounding far too polished. "I represent the interest of our community. I'd like to correct a few misunderstandings." My boss shot me a stunned look. He hadn't warned me Karen might appear. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Karen opened her briefcase and produced a neat folder. "These files include reports from the Neighborhood Watch," she explained, laying them on the table. "They show repeated noise complaints, suspicious activity, and even a few alleged break-ins linked to this agent's address." I bristled. "That's a lie!" I snapped, but she continued without missing a beat. "We asked him many times to cooperate with our volunteer police program, yet he refused, claiming we lacked authority." She let out a delicate sigh. "We only wanted to keep our streets safe." I stared at the panel, struggling to keep my voice level. Karen is not telling the truth. She started this scheme months ago, scaring neighbors into supporting her. She's using false citations to squeeze money out of them. I've even seen the fake forms. The steely-eyed woman on the panel raised a brow. "Do you have these forms with you?" My heart dropped. "Not physically, but I emailed them to..." Karen shook her head, feigning disappointment. "I'm afraid we have no record of that. Perhaps the agent is confused." My anger surged. She was better prepared than I expected, weaving a story that painted me as a rogue agent. Then came the twist that made my jaw drop. The older agent turned to Karen and said, "Before we proceed, we should disclose your family connection." Karen gave a curt nod. "Yes, of course." She glanced at me with a pitying smile. "My uncle is the deputy director of this bureau. I tried to handle this matter quietly, but when your behavior escalated, I had no choice but to bring it to his attention." My stomach lurched. The deputy director was near the top of our chain of command. If he was her uncle, that explained everything. How she shut down the real HOA's lines, how my neighbors felt powerless, and how she'd managed to file official complaints that reached my supervisors so fast. One panelist cleared his throat. "Given Ms. Garrett's connection, we must ensure impartiality, but these claims are serious. Agent, can you provide concrete proof of criminal activity?" My voice wavered. "I have records showing the security firm is unlicensed, and neighbors who've told me they're being extorted, but they're too scared to come forward." Karen pressed her lips together. "My family and I care deeply about law and order. We only encourage people to keep our streets safe." Every word dripped with insincerity. My vision swam, realizing she had deeper roots in the agency itself. I stood alone, cornered by her well-placed influence. The meeting ended with a promise that internal affairs would launch a formal investigation, not just of me, but also of any possible wrongdoing in Karen's group. Yet I walked away feeling like I'd lost ground. Karen beamed at me on her way out, murmuring, "Better watch your step." I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to shout in front of my superiors. My boss jogged after me in the hallway. "I had no idea she was related to the deputy director," he muttered. "This puts us in a tight spot. You're not off the hook." I exhaled shakily. "I know." He gave me a sympathetic look. "Do yourself a favor. Stay calm and gather any evidence you can. We'll need more than hearsay." I left the building in a daze, trying to process this shock. Karen's uncle was one of the highest-ranking officers in the FBI. That meant she had access to connections and resources I never dreamed of. If she could convince my neighbors to back her, what could she do with her uncle's power behind her? My knees felt weak as I reached my car. There was no guarantee internal affairs would believe me now. Not when Karen had official channels on her side. I sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, struggling not to panic. My badge felt heavier than ever in my pocket. Even though I was part of the FBI, I was fighting an enemy who had the agency's own leadership in her back pocket. My only hope was to expose Karen's private security scam, beyond any doubt. But with her family ties and my own reputation on the line, I realized I might have to risk everything, even my career, to bring her down. I drove home from that inquiry, feeling like the floor had dropped beneath me. Karen's influence reached the top of the agency, and I was now under an even darker cloud of suspicion. My boss tried to assure me we'd figure something out, but his voice held little conviction. Once I pulled into my driveway, I felt every nerve on edge, scanning the street for that fake cruiser or the tinted SUV. It was getting late, and most houses had their lights on, but the road looked empty at first glance. I let out a shaky breath, hoping for one normal night. The second I stepped inside, though, my phone buzzed with a text from Tamara. "They're at my door. I'm scared." My heart pounded. I rushed over to Tamara's house on foot, sticking close to the shadows. Sure enough, the so-called HOA officers were parked right in front of her place, engine running. As I crept up behind a hedge, I saw them on her porch, pounding on the door. The taller one yelled, "Open up, or we'll mark this as another violation." My anger flared. These bullies had gone too far. I cleared my throat loud enough to get their attention. One officer turned, face twisting into a scowl. "You again?" he muttered, grabbing at something on his belt. I held my ground, raising my voice. "I'm FBI. This is intimidation. Leave her alone." The other officer reached for a phone. That line won't save you anymore. We have friends in high places. I nearly laughed at the irony. They were admitting their connection to Karen's network. Tamara cracked the door open, eyes wide with fear. Please, just go, she whispered, trembling. One officer whipped out a form. We need you to sign this statement confirming that your friend is harassing the neighborhood. My pulse jumped. They wanted her to turn against me. Furious, I stepped forward. Back off. She's signing nothing. The second officer shoved me, and I stumbled onto the porch steps. Before I could fully regain my balance, the taller one pulled out his plastic zip ties, a nasty smirk on his face. I'd be careful, he warned. One wrong move, and we'll file assault charges. I managed to keep my composure. Impersonating law enforcement is a federal crime. I'll see you behind bars. He pointed a finger at me. You won't get that chance. It sounded like a threat that went beyond HOA fines. Suddenly, a voice behind us said, "What's going on here?" I turned to see Alvarez, the local cop I'd contacted before. He must have been off duty and checking on the area. Relief swept over me as he approached, badge out. The fake officer stiffened, clearly unsure how to play it. Alvarez surveyed the scene. "Ma'am," he addressed Tamara, "are these men trespassing?" She nodded quickly, eyes brimming with tears. "Yes, they won't leave." Alvarez nodded at me. "I got your text about suspicious activity, but it took me a while to swing by." He faced the officers. "Show me some identification." The taller one flashed his phony badge, but Alvarez didn't even blink. "That's not official," he said. "I want a driver's license right now, or you're both coming in for questioning." The officers glanced at each other, then one stammered, "We have the right to be here, authorized by the HOA. Alvarez crossed his arms. "You don't have the right to threaten a homeowner who's telling you to leave. This is private property. Now, step away from the door." He radioed in a request for backup, which made them turn pale. The taller man sneered at me one last time before they hurried to their cruiser. Alvarez and I followed them out, but they drove off before we could stop them. He caught their plate number and muttered, "We'll see what we can do, but you know how tricky this might get." Tamara was shaking as she thanked Alvarez. After he left to file a report, I helped her back inside, where she sank onto her couch. "They want me to blame you for everything," she whispered, voice tight with panic. "They said if I didn't sign, they'd take me to court for not following HOA regulations." I tried to steady her. "It's a bluff. Their paperwork has no legal backing. We'll prove it." Even as I said it, I felt the sting of doubt. Karen's circle had already managed to worm their way into an FBI inquiry and coerce half the neighborhood. Nothing was off limits for them. I stayed with Tamara a while, talking through possible next steps. She agreed to give a formal statement to Alvarez about the harassment, which might be the breakthrough we needed. By the time I headed home, night had fully settled in. Crickets chirped and porch lights glowed up and down the street, but a sense of unease wrapped around me. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from a number I didn't recognize. "You're out of time. Cooperate or lose everything." My chest tightened. They were doubling down now, growing bolder after the near confrontation. I slipped inside my house, locked the door, and sank onto the couch. I had no illusions left. Karen's hold was massive, aided by her uncle's status in the FBI. If I wanted to take her down, I needed concrete evidence that even her family ties couldn't dismiss. My mind churned with ideas, but each one felt riskier than the last. At some point, I drifted off, haunted by thoughts of job suspension or worse. The next morning, I found a slip of paper stuffed in my mailbox. "Meeting tonight at the community center. Be there," it read, with no signature. Part of me thought it was another one of Karen's traps. Still, curiosity and desperation prodded me. If she was holding some public gathering, I might finally catch her in the act. Maybe even record the bogus claims she made. But I couldn't shake the fear that this was a setup designed to humiliate me or paint me as a threat once more. I sat there, staring at that note, feeling the weight of everything. My shaky position at work, my powerless neighbors, and the looming threat of Karen's shadow army. My phone chimed with a message from Alvarez. "We need more witnesses, or I can't file charges. Press them." I felt a faint flicker of hope. If the community center meeting was real, it might be my chance to gather testimonies, show the real face of this so-called HOA police, and finally corner Karen before she destroyed me completely. The clock was ticking, and Karen was drawing everyone into one place, possibly her biggest power play yet. I knew I had to attend that meeting, even though I sensed it might be a trap. If I failed to expose her scheme there, I might lose more than my job. I could lose the neighborhood I once called home. That evening, I got ready for the community center meeting with a knot of tension in my stomach. If Karen was planning something big, I needed to be prepared. I slipped a small recording device into my jacket pocket and grabbed my phone, fully charged and set to record audio. I texted Alvarez, letting him know where I was headed, just in case things got out of hand. His reply came fast. "Be careful. Call if it gets ugly." I took a deep breath and headed out, my mind buzzing with strategies and potential outcomes. When I arrived at the community center, the place was packed. Rows of folding chairs were set up, and most of the neighborhood was already there, murmuring among themselves. I saw Karen near the front, holding a stack of papers and chatting with a few neighbors who had those new "We support the HOA" signs on their lawns. A makeshift podium was set up on the small stage, and two of her fake HOA police stood off to the side, arms crossed like bouncers at a nightclub. I took a seat in the back, hoping to blend in. Karen stepped up to the podium, her voice ringing out with forced cheerfulness. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. As you know, our community has faced some challenges lately. Disruptions, rule violations, and safety concerns. That's why I took the initiative to establish our new HOA police, to ensure a safe and orderly neighborhood." Applause erupted from a handful of supporters, while others exchanged nervous glances. I could feel the tension simmering in the air. Karen continued. "Unfortunately, we've had some resistance from a few individuals who don't respect our community standards." Her eyes darted toward me for a split second, but she moved on quickly. She gestured to the fake officers. "Thanks to our dedicated volunteers, we've already issued several citations for noise violations, unkempt lawns, and suspicious activities. It's all about keeping our streets safe and preserving property values." I couldn't stay quiet any longer. I stood up. "That's a lie," I said, loud enough to make heads turn. Karen's smile faltered. "Excuse me," she said, eyes narrowing. I stepped forward, projecting my voice. "Your so-called HOA police are not legitimate. They're part of a private security group with no legal authority to issue fines or citations. You're running a scam, Karen." A few gasps rippled through the crowd. One of the fake officers moved toward me, but I held up my badge. "Federal agent, touch me and you'll regret it." The officer hesitated, glancing at Karen for guidance. I pushed forward. "These goons are nothing more than hired muscle. Karen's been intimidating and extorting neighbors, making them pay bogus fines and threatening them with eviction. It's illegal." Karen's face flushed with anger. "You're just bitter because you can't handle following rules like everyone else," she shot back. I pulled out my phone, where I'd saved screenshots of Alvarez's findings. "This is proof that your HOA police are unlicensed and unauthorized. The security company they work for has no contract with our community." The room buzzed with murmurs and worried whispers. One man stood up, looking shaken. "Karen, is that true? Are they not real security?" Karen faltered, her bravado cracking. "They're volunteers," she stammered. I seized the moment. "Volunteers don't have the right to detain people or issue fines, and you've been making up infractions to squeeze money out of your own neighbors." I pointed to a pile of papers on the table next to her. "Let's see those citations. I bet they're all as fake as your authority." People started moving forward, eager to see the documents. Karen's hands shook as she tried to pull them away. One of the neighbors snatched a citation from the stack and held it up. "This doesn't look right at all. There's no official seal, no signature." Karen's face went pale, and she grabbed at the paper. "That's confidential," she snapped. But the damage was done. More people were coming up, demanding answers. Someone whipped out their phone, taking pictures of the bogus paperwork. The tension hit a breaking point when one of the fake officers backed away, muttering, "I didn't sign up for this," before bolting out the door. Alvarez suddenly appeared at the entrance, his uniform crisp and his expression serious. "Everyone stay calm," he announced. "We're conducting an investigation into unauthorized security practices and possible extortion." Karen's face drained of color. She tried to compose herself, but it was too late. Alvarez walked up to her. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me for questioning." Karen sputtered, trying to rally her dwindling supporters. "This is harassment. I have connections. You can't do this." But nobody backed her up. Her fake authority had crumbled before everyone's eyes. Alvarez cuffed her and nodded to me. "Good work," he whispered. As Karen was let out, people started talking, realizing how they'd been manipulated. Tamara approached me, eyes shining with relief. "You did it," she whispered. I gave her a tight smile, still feeling the adrenaline rush through my veins. A few neighbors came up to apologize, admitting they'd felt trapped into following Karen's bogus rules. I nodded, too drained to say much, but grateful the truth had finally come out. The aftermath was a whirlwind of statements, paperwork, and an official HOA audit that confirmed Karen had been pocketing fine money for herself. Her uncle, the deputy director, denied knowing about her scheme, but the scandal was enough to put him under heavy scrutiny, and he quietly resigned within weeks. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, and the fake HOA police vanished overnight, their security company facing legal action for unlawful enforcement. A few weeks later, my boss called me into his office. He gave me a long, considering look, then offered a rare smile. "Turns out you were right all along," he said. "Internal affairs cleared you. Karen's actions were deemed illegal and unauthorized, and we've received formal apologies from the neighbors who filed complaints under pressure. You're back on track." Relief washed over me. I'd managed to hold on to my career and my reputation, despite Karen's relentless sabotage. As I walked out of the office, I let out a deep breath, the tension finally breaking. My neighborhood was back to being just that, a neighborhood. No more fake cops, no more phony citations. Just a few curious glances from people still processing how close they'd come to living under Karen's twisted little empire. I couldn't help but smile. I'd survived the storm and brought down the woman who thought she could turn a quiet suburb into her personal kingdom.